Hi. In this module, we are dealing with the end of the 15th century and beginning mid 16th century. So we are going to be going over a little bit of the Renaissance, though I'm going to leave it to other people to kind of go into some of the finer points of the Renaissance. And we're also dealing with the religious wars, which are fairly complicated, but and involve a different number of people. But I'll give it to you in a nutshell to try to keep it simple. Okay, so let's start with a little context. In the last module, we were looking at Charles VII and Louis XI and Charles VIII. So here I'm just giving you like a little bit of the lineage and what happened, because in this module we're mostly going to be dealing with Francis I. And so we're kind of skipping around because most of what I talked about in the last module was Charles VII and Charles VIII. So Charles VII had a male heir, Louis XI, which we didn't really talk about. There was nothing much mentioned about him in the book, so we just kind of skipped over it. So you can see this as Charles VII has a male heir, Louis XI. Louis XI has a male heir, and it's Charles VIII. And Charles VIII has no male heir. And this is the point where we talked about this in the last module. To maintain Brittany in the French kingdom, what happened is that Louis XII became the heir to the kingdom and married Anne of Brittany to retain that region in the kingdom. Unfortunately, Louis XII had no male heir either, Louis XII being a cousin of Charles VIII. And so Louis XII's heir became Francis I. Francis I was his cousin and also his son-in-law. So you can look that up if you want. Now, he was called Francis I because he was born on the first day of the week of the first month of the first year of his reign. He was the first one by that name. So Francis I, and he is quite a figure in French history, and he is the monarch who brought the Renaissance to France. So the Renaissance, which literally means rebirth in French, a period of great development, and it marks the end of the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages are called the Middle Ages because they are the period between basically the fall of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance. So it's kind of, it's also called the Dark Ages many times, although the Dark Ages refers to the earlier parts of the Middle Ages. But anyway, so the Renaissance began in Italy. And Francis I was fascinated by Italy and by what was going on in Italy. And he wanted to conquer parts of Italy. Now, this started with Charles VIII, actually, who believed that he had a right to the kingdom of Naples, which is situated in the southern part of Italy. So Francis I, in Italy at that point in time, what was happening is you had the Medicis, who noble families and rich families were paying for art. It became cool to have art and to pay for art. It was almost, if you will, a status symbol to advance art and architecture and science. It became a kind of a thing for rich families to do. So anyways, Francis I was interested in that. And this is also, let's not forget, this is also a period of great expansion. This is when Christopher Columbus made it to the Americas. This is a period where the Europeans are branching out, and they're not just branching out through Europe and the Middle East, but they're branching out across oceans and going far distances to gain new materials and new knowledge. So Francis I is indeed fascinated by Italy. And this was something started by Charles VIII, as I mentioned, who believed he had a right to the Kingdom of Naples. And this began the Italian Wars. Now, the Italian Wars are a very complex situation, which you could almost see it as somewhat of a world war. Because it involved so many factions. It involved the Swiss, the German, the Spanish, the Italians. So most of this was due to intermarriage and lineages being mixed up and remixed, different claims. So this starts a 6 decades long European war. So most of the countries involved in this fight surround France and are not fighting with France, but they're more fighting against France. So this poses a great threat for France because, I mean, if you can imagine, what if Mexico and Canada decided to gang up on the United States? The United States is a massive country, but when you look at the scale in Europe, and you have France, and then you put Spain, you put Switzerland, you put Germany, against France, it kind of changes things a little and does pose somewhat of a threat. So, anyways, in the end, this comes down to a battle between the Habsburgs and the Valois. The Habsburgs being kind of the Spanish-German side of it, and the Valois being the French side of this. And there were some interesting battles. One of the things that Francis I did is that he had some unexpected strategies where he went through areas that were maybe less accommodating, and had some great hardships going through the mountain areas, and kind of had like a, if you will, a surprise attack. And so also another thing that was going on at this time is we're using armies of mercenaries. So they are paid soldiers, and they are paid for by taxes. Luckily, France is going through a time of somewhat internal peace, relative peace. So it's doing relatively well, and it's a 60-year war, so they can afford a 60-year war. So just imagine we've been at war now for about 15 years. So this is a war that lasted 60 years. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of how much that could cost the population. And they are no longer using as many bows and arrows, but they have included into their armory, they have cannons and muskets. So completely different warfare. Warfare is evolving. So in the end, without going through all the details, it was settled by the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrai, which ended up redistributing some areas and giving the King of France a little bit more leeway over the church in France. So it's very abbreviated, but let's kind of look, and here you have a map of Italy, and if you look at it, the lighter green part there, the foot of the boot, if you will, of Italy is Naples. So that was what France was looking for, but as you can see, Italy wasn't exactly a unified kingdom either. It was in different regions governed by different monarchs or noblemen. So let's take a look at other things that were going on in France at that point in time. So we're done with the Black Plague, luckily. So following the Black Plague, of course, population levels rise, um, and also due to the fact that they are exploring new areas, they have brought back new crops, including maize and buckwheat. So these crops enable them to increase the amount of food that's used, use the land more efficiently, which ultimately results in population boosts. So trade routes are being developed. Cities and towns are flourishing, especially if you're near a port, so a river or a sea, which is obviously where most of the trade would be happening. And this is also one of the times where you have one of the greatest inventions of all time, which is the printing press. So this allows for faster and greater dissemination of materials. Obviously, before the printing press, even though there was another, the Middle East had come up with something beforehand, but in Europe, much of the dissemination had to be done by writing by hand versus a printing press. So at this time, the printing press also enabled the dissemination of the Bible. And along with the Bible, also literature kind of takes off. So up until this point, whenever we see literature, a lot of times we don't know who the author is, but now we're printing things, and authorship is more renowned. So a group of French poets gains some acknowledgement for their works, and this is known as the Pléiade, as well as some other authors, which you can find in your book. I won't go into it too much. So also at this time, something happens with the French language. It becomes more standardized, and French becomes the language used in diplomacy and also in legal and official dealings. So although this sounds like a great development, it's not like most of the population spoke what we think of French today. Most of them still spoke their regional dialects. So making French the language of the courts and of official business dealings was perhaps not so advantageous for them. So you can imagine you enter into a contract, the contract is written in French, and you actually don't really speak French. You speak, let's say, Occitan or Breton or whatever. And you don't know all the stipulations of the contract. Now, if you have to go to court to fight something, you signed a piece of paper without actually knowing what was said in it, and the court dealings are going to be in French, and everything is going to be in a language that you don't quite understand, which puts you at a major disadvantage. And just on a on a personal note, since it's what I study, this was still going on for a very long time in different countries. Even in this country, if you take the example of Louisiana, court dealings would be done in French, perhaps, and people did not speak French if they were from some other descent, which put them at a major disadvantage. And the same can be said in Belgium, where court dealings might be done in Flemish, and if you're a francophone, you didn't understand Flemish, and there was no recourse. So this is one of the reasons today why you can request legal documents in a variety of languages, and you can always request a translator if you find yourself in an area in the United States where people don't speak a certain language, it's a legal right. So at the time, it was not, though. So if you sign a piece of paper, you might be out of luck. So final point is that inflation becomes a part of life. So given the trade and the variety of goods that are present on the market, some are coming from very far distances, and they actually cost a lot of money to bring over. And people are becoming more reliant on market goods. So they're becoming more reliant on buying the bread at not the grocery store, but at the market. So you can imagine if that happened today. If you could not afford your bread at the grocery store, do you know how to make bread on your own? Can you find the wheat to make the flour? Do you know how to make bread? So this is something that people back then were also faced with, is that they were relying on the market to bring them their goods, and no longer had perhaps the land or the materials required to provide them with their basic goods. So inflation happened, and now people had to pay higher prices for goods. Of course, wages stayed stagnant. They did not increase. Inflation was kind of a new concept, so things cost more, but people had the same disposable income. Now what happens in these types of situations where inflation is present, wages are stagnant, but these are what you would call non-elastic goods, so goods that you need, then you have to pay the higher prices. And some people were able to kind of see the system and profit from the system. Other people did not quite see the system as well, and they lost some money on this. So now a big change is that the fact that the concept of business, if you understand how business works, the laws of supply and demand, the logistics of it all, you can actually cash in on your understanding of the system, whereas before you would rely on either brute force, or you would rely on your name or your connections. Now having business savvy actually can move you up the ladder. So this is a fairly important development, according to myself. Okay, so you can improve your standing in society from being having some business savvy and understanding the system and how it works. All right, so in the next clip, I've actually put a little video about how the printing press works, just to give you an idea of the machine, what it looks like, what went into it. So for those of you who are familiar with typewriters, I'm not sure if any of you are, especially the old school typewriters, this might look familiar in some ways. If you're not familiar with a typewriter, it's a little bit harder to kind of imagine, but it was a major invention. So here goes a little explanation of the printing press.
Johannes Gutenberg is the inventor of book printing, although this statement is questioned by many researchers. It is a fact that Gutenberg, a goldsmith from Mainz, invented new tools and a new technology with which he revolutionized printing. The novelty and greatness of this method did not lie in the use of movable type, as movable type had already been in use in the Far East much earlier. It was because of the optimal, coordinated use of the four basic components in the printing process: type, ink, the printing press, and paper. Gutenberg's printing technology involved several phases. During the preparations, the type metal and the ink were carefully chosen. The printing type was cast manually and stored in trays, arranged in compartments. The text was composed by the typesetters onto a composing stick, then onto the form. Then the ink was evenly applied onto the form by a dossel made of sheepskin and filled with horsehair. The final step of the process was to press the rag paper sheet onto the form with the printing press. The printing press consisted of two posts connected by a crossbeam, with a screw inserted into the crossbeam. An iron sheet, the platen, was attached to the end of the screw, which could move up and down. The form and the paper sheet placed on the bed were rolled under the platen on a pair of rails. Gutenberg's first print was a short poem, but his major work was the printing of the Bible. The new technology spread all over the world in a short time. According to a list published by Life magazine, the invention of book printing was the most important event of the second millennium.
And another thing about this is that the paper had to be wet for the ink to stick to it. So you could just imagine the workmanship that had to go into this. And also when you're dealing with this type of printing press, you have to spell, everything has to be backwards. So you can't move forward. So everything has to be done backwards. So you can imagine how much time it would have taken to just get one page of writing done. So, yeah. So thank God it's not that way anymore. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about the next topic, which is the religious wars. So at this point in time, France is a Catholic nation. The king is Catholic. As you remember under Charlemagne, if you were not Catholic, you could be sentenced to death. So that's one way to make sure that your population is going to be Catholic. So here you have a monk putting up the 95 Theses on a church door. And as you can see, the 95 Theses is a print. So the printing press had a great effect on the church. And so far when we've talked about the church, it's been the Catholic Church. But there is an increase in Protestantism, which was started by Martin Luther in Germany. And in France, the Protestants are often called Huguenots and Calvinists. On these churches around town, you could find these flyers and these posters posted everywhere about these 95 Theses for and against. So the printing press had basically, you could compare it to today's Twitter or today's Facebook, where this information now was just being posted publicly and everybody could read it and make up their own opinion and talk about it. And this created somewhat of some dissent between people, and it raised tensions. So the church responded and the government responded, and the government was pretty much Catholic at the time, and so people were accused of heresy. And this is the time of witch burning. This is the time of, Satan and witch burning and Protestants going to hell. So at this point in time, witches and Protestants can be burnt. So now we face a different problem. The heir to the French throne is supposed to be crowned. His coronation ceremony should take place in a Catholic cathedral. So now we face a problem where the next heir to the throne has been raised as a Protestant. So concerning the issue of Catholicism versus non-Catholicism, different countries deal with it in different ways. So to give you an idea, the Spain did not have much of a Protestant problem. It was dealing more with a Jewish and Muslim problem, and Spain dealt with it with the Spanish Inquisition. So Spain wanted Catholicism as the religion of Spain, and anybody who was not Catholic could be under review by the Spanish Inquisition. And perhaps you've heard some stories about the Spanish Inquisition. Some sources say they're greatly exaggerated, but regardless, there was a Spanish Inquisition into your religion, and there were consequences for not being Catholic. Germany dealt with it in a different way by just accepting Protestantism. So it went a different route. And of course, as you know, England, the Church of England, is a Protestant church and is headed by the monarch. So Queen Elizabeth II is not only the Queen of England, she is also the head of the Church of England. So how did France deal with it? France is kind of in the middle of everything because it's not Spain, and it is not Germany or England either. So we have this Henry IV, who has been raised Protestant, but to become King of France, he must be a Catholic and must be crowned in the cathedral by the Pope. So what happens is that Henry IV says, okay, I'll become Catholic, I'll be crowned as a Catholic king. And there is an expression in French that says, Paris vaut bien une messe. Paris is worth a mass. So he just decides, okay, well, this is just one ceremony, I'll just do it, and that's it. But one thing that he does do is that he pushes for the Edict of Nantes. And the Edict of Nantes gives to Protestants, and we'll go over to the next slide here. The Edict of Nantes is an edict that allows Protestants to worship in designated places at designated times. So they can still be prosecuted, but not if they're worshiping in designated places at designated times. So it was very controversial at the time, and it kind of leads to this whole freedom of religion thing, which France will come into later. But also it engendered the Treaty of Vervins, by which Spain could not involve itself into French civil affairs. Since Spain was pushing Catholicism and not Protestantism, and it just could not intervene in French affairs having to do with that. So that's for you. That's the religious wars in a small nutshell. There's much more to it, but I don't want to overwhelm you with names and countries and different regions and all that stuff. So I'm just giving you kind of the condensed version. So we've come to the end of the 16th century, and the early parts of the 16th century were looking pretty good. But the end of the 16th century is not as good. Somehow the weather has changed, and they're going into a mini ice age, and this is really affecting their crops and also affecting the health of the population. So agriculture suffers, there are famines, and there's an increase in diseases. Plagues resurface. And what happens is famine, diseases, that means that the population stops growing and becomes stagnant. So here I've given you an illustration of Peter Bruegel the Elder, a Flemish artist, and in it is children skating on what looks like a river. So I'm from Belgium, and I can tell you that it never really gets that cold in Belgium. So for them to skate on a river, it must have been pretty cold. It does snow, and the snow does stick, but I would say skating on a river is not something that happens much in Belgium. So this mini ice age begins, and it kind of wreaks havoc. Okay, so let's come to our conclusions for this whole chapter. So we went from a period of relative wealth to the plague, and then France suffered some terrible losses and military humiliations to the British. I mean, they really seem to, from bringing their whole Navy fleet out and having knights in armor on them, to having battles where they're facing the sun and can't see anything, having their king captured. I mean, it wasn't good. So that was the Hundred Years' War. But fortunately, they did win the Hundred Years' War, which in great part was due to Joan of Arc, who managed to bring Charles VII to the Cathedral of Reims and have him crowned king, which restored a great deal of confidence in the ability of France to handle itself. Along with that, Charles VII brought along his diplomacy and expanded or took back or regained control of Burgundy and Brittany. And we moved from there to the Renaissance, which made its way from Italy to France, bringing along art, literature, architecture, which I have a couple videos for you to watch about the Renaissance. It's such a terrific period of time that I just feel like other people might be best to explain it to you. So, although Italy brought its beauty to France and its science and all that stuff, France brought war to Italy through the Italian Wars. Charles VIII and Francis I claiming ownership of Naples. One thing I would like to say about the Renaissance, though, which I found interesting, is that you might be familiar with Leonardo da Vinci, who painted the Mona Lisa, or La Joconde, as it's called in French. And, towards the end of his career, since, the Renaissance was happening and Leonardo da Vinci was a big part of it, but towards the end of his career, other people had emerged and people were interested in these other people, and he was losing a little bit of steam. And Francis I brought Leonardo da Vinci to France, where Leonardo da Vinci spent the rest of his days along the Loire Valley, I believe, and, came up with some other fantastic ideas. If you know anything about Leonardo da Vinci, he was not only an artist, but a great engineer and, into physiology and just amazing thing. It's the Renaissance is a period of, art, architecture, and science, and it's just tremendous what they did during that period. Anyways, so what else? What else happened? So the other thing that happened is, of course, that France and other countries are expanding their holdings and going overseas to South America, North America. They're going to China, and just expanding overall and seeing what else is out there. So the world is no longer just Europe. The world is expanding into a much wider network. And then we have the printing press, which just completely exploded the amount of information that people could obtain. Not only the Bible, but also literature and philosophy. So this kind of culminated into the religious wars, and the world could never be the same after the printing press, since now these ideas that the elite, that the intellectual elite have, are available not just to some, the educated, but are available to all. So this definitely changes the game for everyone. So I have put up the links to these two videos. The first one, I think, is about a half an hour, and there's a little quiz at the end of it, and that quiz is your homework. So you will post your answers, they're true or false answers, as a homework grade. And then I've also posted Rick Steves' Europe. He takes a trip to Florence. Since most of the Renaissance really happens in Italy, this, obviously it's not France, but it does explain rather well the differences. Both videos explain the differences between the art and architecture of pre-Renaissance and then Renaissance, adding the perspective and the dimension and the more humanistic way of doing art. Okay, so take a look at those 2 videos. They're not too long and they're pretty interesting. And I have some discussion questions for you, where I would like for you to take a look at Leonardo da Vinci's Wikipedia page. And I would like for you to just kind of skim through it and pick something that you think is pretty interesting about him, because he wasn't just a one-trick pony. He dealt with medicine, art, and engineering. And I mean, those are 3 very complex areas, and he excelled in all 3. And he also had an interesting life. So just take a look at the page, look at the table of contents, kind of skim through it, find something that you like, read through it, and explain why you liked it. And also, did you learn anything unexpected about his life? I know that for me, there is an aspect of his life that I found most unexpected and that I could greatly relate to. Is there something in his life that you found unexpected? Okay, and number 3, does anybody compare to him in our era? Is there anybody that you can think of that you would say is this type of person who is not a one-trick pony, but can offer our society value in different ways? Okay, so thank you very much. Goodbye.